Hello, 11th and 12th graders from Calvary Christian School. Welcome to U.S. History. We are going to be starting where we left off, right around there, on number 41 in your notes. I realize we've already covered some of this, but we're just going to get a running start back into the lectures. So we're going to start with number 41 about dime novels. We're talking about the culture of the West being a new culture added to the American lifestyle. And dime novels were a great popular form of literature of the late 19th century, where it allowed that culture of the West to be spread, disseminated into the East as well. The subject matter of these dime novels were focused on real men, both good and bad, who contributed to the founding of the West. And some of those men were, let's see. There we go. There we go. Sorry about that. Kit Carson, who was one of the best-known heroes of the early West. He was a hunter, a guide, and a soldier. You can see there he's got this in the Great American Novels. Unfortunately, he's just doing a lot of killing there. And then William F. Buffalo Bill Cody, who worked for the Pony Express, and that's where he met one of his closest friends. He also served as a Union scout and hunted buffalo to feed the workers on the Kansas Pacific Railroad. He later owned a Wild West show where it was set up like a circus. It was a traveling circus where he had people from the West who come out and they would do tricks for people to enjoy. Let's try again. Wyatt Earp and Wild Bill Hickok were two of the most famous peace officers in the West. Earp fought at the Battle of OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. Hollywood even made a movie of it. It's 2 hours long for a 13-second battle. Check it out. Or don't. I don't care. Okay, and then Hickok was famous for cleaning up the town of Abilene, Kansas. These cow towns, they called them, were located at the hub of the rail stations at the end of what was called the Long Drive. We talked about that before. The Long Drive was when cattle was brought up to rail stations to then be transported to the Midwest, specifically places like Chicago, where the meat markets were, where there was butcher shops. The cattle was processed, canned, or sent out as meat from places like Chicago. Calamity Jane, she was a close friend of Wild Bill Hickok. They met while they were Pony Express riders. She became later a scout for General Custer. You'll notice that she is dressed in pants. That was not unusual in the Old West. We don't see it a whole lot because, frankly, we don't have a lot of pictures from the Old West. We kind of think we do, but overall, no, especially of women. But there were a lot of women who wore pants in the Old West because they rode horses. And when you ride a horse, you kind of need that little bit of extra cloth between your knees. But she dressed like a man or like a boy, and nobody asked her, and she didn't offer any information. So they just, yes, okay, you get the job. And she did well in that job and as a scout for General Custer as well. But then there were also women like Annie Oakley, who was a markswoman. She became a star in Buffalo Bill's Wild West Circus. She was known as Little Sure Shot. And she played up her femininity. She was very beautiful, and she was seen as quite the starlet of her day. Jesse James was one of the bad guys in the Old West, and there were plenty of those as well. He and his gang spent 15 years robbing banks, stagecoaches, and trains in Missouri and neighboring states. And their whole motivation was revenge because they disagreed with how the Civil War ended. They were all on the side of the South, and the trains that they robbed were part of the Pacific Union Railroad, so they went after those. William H. Bonney, also known as Billy the Kid, he was a cattle thief who claimed that he had killed 21 men by the time he was 21 years old. Nobody argued with him over that claim after the first guy got shot. People just, okay, whatever you say. So yeah, Billy the Kid, also known as Bonnie. Okay, now let's talk about legendary figures. Sometimes people get a little confused between myth and legend. A myth is a crazy, fun story, larger than life, usually explains a natural phenomenon, but it also has a mythological or a religious element. Legendary stories don't have that religious element. They can explain a phenomenon, but they don't provide like a religious background to it. So these two men are legendary figures, and sometimes in their stories there's information about why things are the way they are today as a result of that, but there's no religious element there. For Pecos Bill, he was supposed to be the toughest of the cowboys, and there's a good reason for that. He had a rough start in life. According to his story, his legend, his family had so many children that when they were traveling through Texas in a covered wagon, they hit a bump, and his cradle fell out of the back of the covered wagon. But the family was so harassed by so many children that they didn't even realize he had fallen out. They didn't realize he was missing. So the coyotes came and they raised him themselves. And so you can imagine he'd be kind of a tough character being raised by coyotes. According to his legend, he also at one time, just for the fun of it, lassoed a tornado and rode it for fun. Then you have Paul Bunyan, who was washed up on shore in the northeastern part of the United States on the northeast coast. He was adopted. He was cared for by an entire community that kind of glommed around him and helped raise him. But as he became an adult, he was so big, he was a massive giant of a man, that he had to leave his area. There just wasn't enough room for him. He didn't have enough room to stretch out, to breathe, to be who he really was. And he became a metaphor for everybody who left the eastern part of the United States for the western part of the United States because they needed that extra breathing room, because they needed a place where they could stretch out and be themselves and do things for themselves. Okay, new inventions and technical advances in the late 19th century led to greater productivity and made American life more comfortable and convenient. And we still really appreciate those inventions and technical advances. Even today, we love it when a new invention comes out. A new technical advance becomes the news. We are excited about that. That's just part of being American. And the creation of those technological advances and inventions, that's American too, because we love our inventors. So let's talk about this invention. It's pretty phenomenal. The American cow milker. I love it because according to this ad, this is the most important and valuable invention of the 19th century. Woohoo! Okay. When you think about dairy farms and how many cows had to be milked on a dairy farm to create butter, milk, cheese, all the wonderful things that Americans love to cook with, you can understand why dairy farmers would be so excited over this miraculous invention. It was a sure cure for aching hands and kicking cows. There is still a form of this being used today on dairy farms. Okay, the Bell Telephone Company was organized by the inventor Alexander Graham Bell in 1877. He created the first telephone based on a scale model of the human ear and then hired an engineer, a man named Watson, to come in and engineer that invention. So he created the telephone with Watson, and then he also started the first telephone company. By 1895, there were 300,000 phones in the country. By 1900, there were 800,000 phones in the country. That's amazing. It just spread so quickly. People were excited over the idea of telephones because it meant great communication really for the first time in American history. Before this, if you wanted to talk to family that were living far away, maybe in another state, maybe way out west, the only options you had was to write a letter, which could sometimes take up months to arrive. Or you could, with the invention of the telegraph, you could send a short message that was pretty expensive and it had to be very, very short. But this way, you could have an instantaneous conversation with somebody. Still expensive, but you could talk to that person and get a back and forth dialogue going. And that was really important and exciting. Okay, Thomas Edison. He has been called the greatest inventor in history. Modern historians want so desperately to take that title away from him for no other reason than they don't appreciate American exceptionalism. Thomas Edison had his flaws, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't mean he didn't do some incredible things. So we're going to look at the good and the bad of Thomas Edison here. Let's start with some of the good. He established the first modern scientific laboratory. It was in Menlo Park, New Jersey, on his little piece of property there. And he became known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. Today, it's a museum. You can go visit it if you're ever in that area. He is famous for having said once that genius is 1% inspiration, that's the thought, and that it is 99% perspiration. That's the work that has to go into it to create something that is a great invention. Of course, his most famous invention is the incandescent electric light bulb. Now, this is where you see a lot of people really starting to take issue with Edison. The claims are he didn't actually invent it, that somebody else invented a light bulb before him, but he got the patent first. And there are some elements of that story that are true, but for the most part, it's really just been taken out of context. So let's talk about this light bulb. He did create an incandescent, that means it creates light through heat, light bulb. And he did that by using, he experimented with over 100 different materials to figure out what kind of element could go inside this glass globe that would glow and yet not melt or break the bulb. And he finally settled on a metal called tungsten. He created that light bulb and it worked really well. The man that everybody claims was ripped off by Edison did not use tungsten. He used water. It was not a very successful invention. It worked the way he said it would, but it wasn't really a success. He kind of overstated a little bit. So when he went to the patent office and he was trying to show it off, they were looking at it and they said, no, it's not really doing exactly step by step what you said it was going to do. So he did not get the patent. Edison did get the patent because what he said would happen did happen. He proved his information was correct. He did later on go back and try to use the other man's information to create that light bulb just to see if it would work, because that man was trying to sue him, saying that, hey, you stole my idea. And Edison's like, no, we had kind of a similar idea. I used tungsten, you were using water. He went back and he did create that man's light bulb from the instructions. And he says, okay, I could create it, but it's a terrible product. And the court case was actually thrown out. So he started his own electric company as well. And it eventually merged with another to form General Electric, whose motto became, we bring good things to light. Okay. Now, some of the bad things that were going on with Thomas Edison, he was a big fan of the electricity, and he wanted to have his electric company. We talked about his electric company. There was another man around the same time from Europe who said, I think your form of electrical current is dangerous. And Edison said, yours is dangerous. And so Edison, to prove that his electrical current was safer, did electrocute animals that were scheduled to be put down for one reason or another, usually for attacking human beings. His most famous, of course, or infamous, was Topsy the elephant. That was a real thing. He did electrocute an elephant using the current of this other inventor and said, see, I told you, mine's not going to do that to you. It will. But anyway, that was Thomas Edison's little foray into animal cruelty. But yeah, he still was a good invention. When people talk about the light bulb issue and they want to make it sound like that was his only thing, he created over 100 different inventions. He proved his worth repeatedly. Okay, now, a lot of times when these guys would go out, and women too, would go out and create these great inventions, sometimes they would get together for expositions. An exposition was like a world fair. And it allowed for all of the technical goodness, all of these new inventions to be shown to the people for the first time. So the Centennial Exposition, this was in Philadelphia in 1876. This was the World Fair hosted by the United States as part of its 100-year birthday. Woo-woo! The fair covered a lot of room. Oh man, there's a lot of property. 236 acres. Just to give you a little bit of an estimate there, our school sits on 6 acres. That's 230 less. Okay. So, or more. They had 167 buildings. They had displays from all 38 states at the time and 50 foreign nations. The favorite displays were the new mechanical inventions. People were really, really excited about this. But you'll also notice at the bottom right-hand side of your screen, there is a gigantic arm with a torch. That's because that is the torch of the Statue of Liberty. It was sent over to the United States from France as an anniversary gift. Its original place was supposed to be at the Suez Canal, but it was not wanted there by the people who were in control of the Suez Canal. They said, no, we don't want it, thanks. So they sent it to us as a birthday gift. We got regifted, but we don't care. We still embrace it and we love it. But at the World's Fair, portions of it were displayed so everybody could see a little bit of it close up. And it's just a remarkable, remarkable sculpture. Okay. This is one of the machines. This is a calculator. Slightly bigger than the calculator that you just now have as an app on your phone. It took a long time, but calculators got down to where they were just an application now, which is pretty exciting. This is a gigantic calculating machine. Then we also had a sewing machine. Sewing machines have been around for a long time, both used in the home and in factories, but they were getting smaller and less expensive, more detailed, and easier for people to have in their own homes, which is really important. I love this. This is gorgeous. This is a soda fountain. Now, you can't just walk right up to the soda fountain and pull your own drink like you can today, like at AM, PM. They have soda fountains on the wall where you just walk up with a cup and you fill it yourself. No, soda fountains back in the day it was really for a mixologist to take control of. You went to the outside of that bar, that outer area, and you placed your order and they would create your soda for you. They would add the syrup, they would add the fizzy water, the carbonation, and they'd hand it to you. And you could get a variety of different sodas that way, all different kinds of flavors. This is a typewriter. And it's one of the newer typewriters, which is exciting because the original typewriter was in alphabetical order. And people figured out really quickly that that was really inconvenient because you use A a lot. But the A on the original typewriter was all the way in the upper left-hand side. It took a man later on to figure out, he was actually a typist, he was a reporter, and he figured out that if you put all the most commonly used letters on the middle row, you could make that your home row, and everything else you could reach up and down to. So the least convenient or the least used letters were put in the far corners. Okay, you see the Q all the way in the corner now. And then Z is all the way on the bottom corner because you just don't use Z's all that often. This is the Corliss Centennial engine. It was the most powerful engine of its time. It was massive. And people went to go look at it. Okay, in the years following the Civil War, new technological developments led to revolutionary advances in American agriculture. And we already talked about some of that with the milking machine. But this one is going to be a really important invention. This is the steel plow. And that's going to be really important, especially in the West, where you're dealing with kind of a lot of sod, a lot of grasses in the soil, and having to break that up required a lot of sharp, powerful materials. In the South, you had George Washington Carver, who was one of the greatest contributors to the advancement of American agriculture. He was looking to rebuild his home in the South. That's where he was from. He was born into slavery. After he was freed, he worked for his education, and he ended up with a degree in Iowa State Agricultural College, and then went to go teach at Oberlin University, or Oberlin College, which we all remember is the very first college to admit women, and then also Black Americans were admitted as well. And just that little bonus there is the first Black woman who graduated from Oberlin was Langston Hughes's grandmother, and we know about him from our literature. It's great. Okay, in 1896, Carver joined the staff of Tuskegee Institute at the request of Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington loved education, and he fought for his own education, and then in turn created educational opportunities for others. But it was more than just learning, it was also applying what was learned. And so he became one of the great talent seekers of his day. He wanted to find out who knew their job the best and hire them to teach. And so he asked Booker T. Washington asked Carver to come and teach on the staff at Tuskegee University. He was dedicated the rest of his life to training Black students and to finding ways to improve Southern agriculture, because that's where they lived. So they wanted to improve Southern agriculture right there. And the school itself, Tuskegee Institute, raised their own food. They didn't import food for the students to eat. They raised their own food. And all the students did help work in the fields to get the food on the table. It was very important. The Smith-Hughes Act. On a federal level, this provides funds to help high schools finance courses in agriculture, home economics, and other vocational subjects. The idea of a vocational subject, that means working with your hands, working on a job that does not require a college degree. It doesn't require a lot of years of education. It requires work, is what it requires. But these are three really, really, really important things to be looking at. Agriculture, because people need to eat. When you start making comments about farmers, and you've never been a farmer, you should probably just sit down, be quiet, and listen to what the farmers have to say, because they actually know what they're doing. They've been doing it for a very long time, and they're very talented people. So agriculture was really important in order to get food on the table to people. Home economics was incredibly important because it was the creating of the home environment and the house. That was absolutely top notch. And that was an important job in American history. Unfortunately, in the late 50s, early 60s, people started to discount the idea of home economics. And I don't really want to just say people. It was specifically a very small group of women really started to discount the idea of the necessity of the home. And that's really a shame, because it used to be an art form as well as seen as a career path for women. If you read people like Louisa May Alcott looking at the home as a job, that was incredibly important, and it was respected as a job. Other vocational subjects would include things like electrical, or an electrician, a plumber, anybody who works with their hands, anybody who makes life more pleasant for other people. Thank God for those people, or we would just be sitting around in the dark and in our own waste. We need people who do vocational things. Thank God for mechanics, truck drivers, people in the grocery stores. We need people from every walk of life working together to make our lives wonderful. Okay, capitalism. This is an economic system in which individuals are free to follow their economic pursuits as they see fit. So if you see something that needs to change, or you see something that you look at and go, you know what, I think there's room for this on the market, then please, in the United States, we want you to do that. We want you to fill that gap. We want you to reach out and do something great with your life. We want that from you. We need the new apps. We need the new home economics systems. I mean, I would love it. I would love to have a yard that had a full raised garden, as well as the irrigation system. I personally can't do that, but I'm looking at someone who is taking advantage of capitalism, who has a business that I can hire to come in and do that for me. There's somebody out there who's saying, you know what? there's a need for that, and I'm going to fill that need. And that's so important. But since, of course, we're using the Coca-Cola logo, let's talk about Coca-Cola really quick. John Scythe Pemberton, inventor of Coca-Cola in 1886, made it in his backyard the first time, was creating really a syrup for migraines and stomach upset. Cola was often used for stomach upset at that time, but he added some fizziness to it. And then he also added a little extra ingredient that most people know today as cocaine. So he put cocaine in the original formula of Coca-Cola, and everybody felt really good about that. Then that was discovered to be A, too expensive, and B, really addictive. And a lot of people weren't drinking it by that time just for medicinal purposes. They were drinking it for fun, but he realized that he could just change the formula a little bit and add the caffeinated portion of that instead of cocaine. And Bob's your uncle, you've got Coca-Cola invented, and we're so thankful to this day. Mr. S loves Coca-Cola. I'm a Diet Coke person, Diet Pepsi, love it. Unfortunately, John Scythe ended up becoming addicted to his own drugs. He was a pharmacist and he died broke. So capitalism has its place and it's important, but it still has to do with what the person puts into it and what they take out of it. It's not a perfect system all on its own. It really depends on the person who is in it. It depends on your drive, your heart, your decisions that you make. It's not the system, it's the people involved in the system. And that's really important to remember. By the turn of the 20th century, nearly half of the cotton goods manufactured in the country were produced in the South. This was completely different than pre-Civil War. Before the Civil War, I told you I was reading the book by Hinton Rowan Helper. He just lambasted the South for the fact that they had really almost no manufacturing in the South, that they were claiming that cotton was king, but the East Coast or the Eastern states were producing more hay and getting more money from hay than the South was from cotton. I mean, he was just lambasting them and saying, look, you guys think you are the agricultural epicenter of the United States, and you're not. You're like way far behind everybody else because you don't believe in manufacturing. That was really seen as kind of we don't want to actually work. Okay. They really had this idea from Europe, the idea that they would have these big homes and these big houses, but actual like manufacturing work was seen as almost, that's beneath me. After the Civil War, when everything was just destroyed and they had to rebuild the South, the idea of manufacturing became a good thing. And by just 40 years later, you have nearly all the cotton goods manufactured in the country coming from the South. They really turned it around and made a big difference for their part of the country. Let's address the young lady on the right-hand corner. Yes, she is a child. You can tell by her short skirt, her short stature. She's wearing her shoes and her little stockings. She looks adorable. But yes, she is actually working, and she will be working anywhere from 8 to 12 hours that day to get money to help her family. Child labor was a thing. It's still a thing. There are just better laws regulating it now. Okay, Birmingham, Alabama became the center of the Southern iron and steel industry. It was known as the Pittsburgh of the South, which was famous for its steel manufacturing for a very long time before Alabama started, but they became known for their steel manufacturing. That's good. Henry Bessemer invented a process. It's called the Bessemer process. That's how you can always remember his name. In which large quantities of steel could be produced at very little cost. Now, at the time that he was coming up with this, there was an American who was attempting the same kind of process. Henry Bessemer beat him by just a little bit of time. But Henry Bessemer gets the credit because he invented it first. In the United States, we have a saying, you snooze, you lose. The guy who comes in first wins. Period. He came in with a great process. The Bessemer process is really so simple. It's kind of shocking that it took so long for people to figure it out. But honestly, it took geniuses like Bessemer to figure it out and go, oh, there's just that little thing that we need to do right at the end that we can do. Okay, so he basically kept the whole process. It's called the open hearth method. This is a precise technique of steel production. Both the Bessemer process and the open hearth method were introduced in the United States in the 1860s. The difference between the open hearth and the Bessemer process were in the Bessemer process at the very end, there was some carbon that was shot in to the pig iron, and that created the steel. It was just a little blast at the very end, and everybody was like, that's all it really took, and thank goodness, because steel took off after that and became a huge selling point in the United States, and really, really important for things like building railroads, and also for building skyscrapers. It's going to become a really important part of American culture. Okay, that's all for today, and I thank you for your attention. Make sure you work on your homework as you go. I will talk to you later. See ya.